And a way to kind of know if you're not on learning enough as an organization is if there's too many arguments that either start with or end with, that's the way we've always done it. The capacity to absorb change takes about 3 to 5 years. If you didn't have the muscle memory to absorb change today, this is where you got to go out to the service providers to get you there in 9 to 18 months, because you don't have 3 to 5 years. Focus on your discipline of absorbing change and your processes for absorbing change and your behaviors and your structures for absorbing change, much more than absorbing the next change that's here. I think prioritization is always going to be important. Who drives prioritization?
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the GLIT podcast. This is our Hello 2024 series, where we are talking about planning for the year. In the previous editions, we have done a session on leadership, we have done a session on business, we've done a session on career. And this is something that is so dear to my heart because it's my first love, technology. As a tech leader, you also need to have a plan for your year. And we today will be discussing on what a tech leader needs to think about as he plans for the year. We are specifically talking in terms of a CIO, a CDO, a Chief Innovation Officer, a CTO, who needs to be responsible for the technology component of the business. And he needs to ensure that everything is put in place for the business to thrive. That requires a lot of planning. You need to plan for your infrastructure. You need to plan for the spending you're going to spend. You need to plan for a whole lot of things. Well, it's not my time today. It's the time of my friend, Richie, who is going to be our guest today. Richie is based in the US. He's Richie Etwaru. He's a Forbes Technology Council member, and he is the owner of Mobius AI, where he serves as chairman and chief technology officer. Richie has a very rich career, and it's a career that is really enviable. He's had the best of every world. And when I say the best of every world, he's had the best in banking, he's had the best in academia, he's had the best in entrepreneurship, he's had the best and has done a whole lot of stuff. I would not bore you with what he's done, but I'll just say he's done stuff with UBS, which is a Swiss bank. He's done stuff with Barclays, which is a British bank. And he's done stuff with Wells Fargo, which is an American bank. How better can your career get? And also, he has a PhD. So when I said the best of every world, he has everything. He has a PhD from the University of Phoenix. So even though he grew up in New York, he's gone across the country all the way down to Phoenix, Arizona, where he's done his PhD in organizational leadership. So he's very much a tech person, but also very much a business person, and also very much an organizational leader. So I wouldn't bore you too much. It's Richie's show tonight, and he's going to be telling us on how CIOs, CXOs, CDOs plan their tech infrastructure for a very profitable year. Hello, Richie. How are you today? Welcome to the GLIT podcast.
Thank you for having me. And given that it's the beginning of the year, I want to take this last opportunity to wish everyone a happy new year. I hope 2024 is fantastic. And I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. So we are going to ask you of course, before we start looking forward, it's very necessary to also to glance backward. Even if you don't look backwards, you can take a glance backwards and see what happened last year. Can you tell us some of the nice things that you learned? And as a business owner / CXO, what were some of the things you learned in prepping your technology? Did you have any surprises? How did you handle them? And what were the key highlights of last year, 2023, for you?
I think 2023 was a pivotal year for the relationship between technology and business. And that comes across in different dimensions. It would be it would be difficult to not mention artificial intelligence as a topic of 2023. And I think what's unique there is the involvement in the business in the discussion. With technology in the past, or at least over the last decade or two, a lot of times the new technology conversations were raised by technologists, whether it's the CTO, CIO, CDO. What happened last year is that there was a little bit more of an awareness from the business side of organizations to raise the AI discussion. So that's number one. And that's going to implicate, how we navigate this journey between technology and business in 2024 and beyond. Second is the capital markets. So I think the capital markets have shown something that is unique in 2023, which is sort of a resilience of consumer spending against rising interest rates in the US and in other parts of the world. And so that's telling us something about the new macroeconomics that are post-COVID and this new relationship between Wall Street and Main Street as we progress forward. And I think last is just cybersecurity. Cybersecurity continues to be top of mind for most individuals across most industries. And it's starting to branch out beyond hacking and beyond phishing, but now into things that are a little bit more state organized or things that are a little bit more automated with the use of artificial intelligence, et cetera. So I think somewhere in those three things kind of wrap up the lessons from 2023 that are going to have implications in 2024 and beyond.
Beautiful. I love the fact that you mentioned that there's no way this conversation can happen without us having a conversation about AI. Deliberately, I pushed that to the very end because I choose to, I fight very hard not to base every conversation on AI. Every room you get into, there's an AI conversation, but I try very hard not to have it at the beginning. But it's good. Yes, I think last year was a good year of convergence. Last year was a good year of this time the technology innovations were things that the business couldn't ignore. This time they had to get involved. And of course, the states also couldn't sit back, because if they had to sit back, it was just going to be too catastrophic. So immediately we started seeing the AI policies jumping up from both the EU, from the US, and even ISO created a new standard. Everything happened at the speed of light. Beautiful things happened. Okay, great. Thank you very much for that. So as a leader, or tech leader specifically, what is that point where a business actually begins to see tech as a partner and not as a cost center? Because we know today, anytime the CIO shows up, the mindset is, so how much do you need this time? Right. So at what point, and as a business partner, because there's literally the business wouldn't thrive without IT anymore. It's like IT is the blood of any organization. As a business partner, how would a great CIO or CXO position himself so he doesn't seem like that little boy who is always asking for more, and he's now seeing that like someone who needs to be empowered so that the business can thrive?
I think first, the role of technology has been diversified incredibly. Right? Technologists today don't only come from a technology background. You can come from a business background. I know some of the best technologists in the world who come from a psychological background. And then there's the other aspects of diversity, which is age and gender, et cetera. So I think from a people perspective, the nature of who a technology or a technologist is has widened quite a bit. And so that nerddom has come out of the role or the functions. And it's a little bit more broader. And what that has led to is it's actually improved the relationship between the technology function and the business function, because there's more fluency across the two sides of the discussion. There's more commonality of vocabulary across the two sides of the discussion. And I think a lot of times when we think about impact, or we think about the actual ROI on technology, we tend to think about the mathematical aspects of it. But I think that's an after the fact. I think the beginning of technology and the beginning of the building of a return on investment starts with people. It starts with the relationship and it starts with trust across technology and the business. What's unique about the current market that we're in is that we spent quite a bit of time, the 10 years before digital transformation started, where technology had to educate the business on the opportunities that can come from technology. But through digital transformation, I feel like the fluency of the business has actually increased around technology. You'll remember days when the role of a technologist was to learn the business, right? That was the whole sort of mantra behind it. We spent the last decade where the business learned the technology. And so we're at the precipice right now where that discussion can be more collaborative, it could be more joint, and it can really orient around a long-term business outcome as opposed to a long-term technology program. And that's where I think the rubber hits the road. Now, unique to 2024 is given the pace of all the innovation that's coming out of 2023, driven not only by AI, but the cost reduction of cloud, as well as the maturity of the platforms for data modernization, the business is more active in the technological fluency and the technological vocabulary. So I think we're at that point where business cases are going to fail less, and technology programs are going to fail less. And I think that comes down to that shared relationship, that shared understanding about where we're trying to go. And that's my sense around it. We're seeing some beginning aspects of that already, where you're seeing technologists become business leaders, and you're seeing business leaders become technologists at the same time.
Beautiful. I love that. Thank you so much. So, which means we have less geeks running technology, and we have the business also understanding technology better. So I think that convergence actually makes things easier for both the tech part and both the business part. So it's not like, what's this contraption you're acquiring? What are these rocket science equipment that you're purchasing? It's now about how can you help us to do more, or how can we help you to help us? I love that so much, and it's a very wonderful thing. But how do we now begin to evaluate this kind of alignment? Because if you have said all this good stuff, and we assume that, okay, the geeks are getting smarter and the smarter people are getting geekier, as the case may be, what metrics should we have in place to ensure that there's a very, very great balance, and that this is exactly as we believe it is? I mean, case in point, if I tell you I want to grow, you tell me go eat. And when I eat and sleep, I would grow. But how do we check if I'm actually growing? You get the drift. So how do we ensure that this alignment is actually existing, not in assumption, but it's actually happening and it's progressive? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that is important is the frequency of realignment. A lot of times when large IT projects go into implementation, it's set up pretty smartly, right? You've got a governing body with a steering committee. You've got budget allocation. You have quarterly reviews, and you have a tremendous amount of tracking that goes into it, whether it's from project management or KPIs or MBOs. Those are really good functions for projects where you could put them into motion and they could keep going for 3 years or keep going for 2 years. What I believe is that the nature of the marketplace is changing so quickly, and the concurrency of change that's happening is increasing in its density, where 10 years ago, a CIO or a CTO had to deal with one new phenomenon, mobile, right? And it takes about 3 to 5 years to manifest itself into the organization. Today, the half-life of that is about 6 to 9 months before it manifests itself into the organization. And the concurrency is you're dealing with about 3 of those at the same time. And so every quarterly sort of update on the project or a program now requires an opportunity for realignment, because the vendor landscape might have changed fundamentally. And a vendor that you thought was the best fit for your project 9 to 18 months in the future might no longer be the case. And so I think realignment is really important. And the method there is, In the past, you want to make sure the project doesn't go off the rails. And so you try to keep it to that plan that you have. Here, you want to make sure that it doesn't go off the rails, but there's many train tracks and many paths of how you can get there, to kind of just overextend that metaphor for a little bit. So I think that's first, that's housekeeping, which is the frequency by which that realignment happens. And that has to be a reality because it's driven by the evidence in the marketplace, which is the increase in the density of the concurrency of these big phenomena, as well as the pace of the changes that are reshaping the competitor landscape, the provider landscape, the service provider landscapes. That's number one. The second side of that coin is also the ability to budget for success. I think we've gone through a period in digital transformation where the CapEx for getting a project done was well taken care of, right? It takes X millions of dollars to get to rollout. But the OpEx for adoption hasn't been something that I think has been focused on enough. And I think there's been a lot of focus on innovation with CapEx and not enough focus on adoption with OpEx. And I think that's that balance that will have to come into play now to make sure that you can get the return on the investments that you put into place. Because a lot of times, once you roll out, without the adoption that's necessary, you're not going to get the ROI. And the work to drive adoption is almost as important and as big as the work to build the systems and test the systems and mature the systems and orient the systems. So I think that's one of the other sort of best practices that are maturing in the art of technology-driven transformation across businesses.
Beautiful. Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. And exactly what I mean, you're hitting the nail. There's a round nail in the round hole, and it's just aligning perfectly. Two things I like. The next question.
Hopefully with a round hammer as well.
Beautiful, yes. The next question I'm going to ask you is about budgeting, and I like the kind of sync you've given into it. But before you even go into the budgeting, initially you mentioned that before people thought the immediate ROI was on the finances, but they've forgotten that the people is actually an ROI. And of course, I know you have it somewhere at the back of your mind that the value given is also part of the ROI, because sometimes people just think in terms of the numbers. So am I going to get mobile apps for $5 million? Mobile, 5 million. No, yes, it's more than that. And you hit the nail on that head. And I love it because there's the people, there's the productivity, there is the growth, there is the enablement and acceleration that comes with that implementation. And more of also, which I love so much and it's very dear to me, is the adoption. That adoption is a critical thing a lot of people don't usually see, because they think, let's just do AI. Oh, can we have a ChatGPT system in this company? Of course, yes, which could be an LLM, which could be integrated to Azure or AWS or whatever. But how do we get people to love it? How do we get people to trust it? How do we get people to know it? How do we get people to use it? How do we make it second nature for people so that before they go to Google or before they click the search button in SharePoint, they have gone to the company GPT, as it were, and they are able to get out knowledge from there? That's another journey that is so, so important that a lot of people skip. And in the process of skipping that component, a lot of projects become unsuccessful. And I think in that place, that's where you have the Center of Excellence, and that's where you have some initiatives that ensure that the adoption is good. I also like the fact that you said, CapEx, we are masters at CapEx, 5 years CapEx, 3 years CapEx, no miscellaneous. Every item must have a budget. But what of the operational? What of the support? What of the growth? What of the adoption? And all those, we never really think about that. Lovely stuff, lovely stuff. So let's move on and let's talk about budgeting. You've mentioned that operational excellence, operational growth, adoption. What else do you think one should budget for? And more than that, in a very large enterprise where you have the marketing, now organizations begin to say, if I want to sell a solution to company X, either Fortune 100, 500, or 1000, don't go sell to the CIO because he's never going to buy it. He's always going to have an alternative. You go sell to the business owner, and when the business owner or the business owner or the business sponsor, as the case may be, when the business sponsor loves it, he will do the internal work, he will do the internal politics, he'll do the internal conviction to the CIO. Now, first of all, enhancing that budgeting thing you started up, how do we ensure that we get the budget done? And then how do we ensure we carry all the organizational departments or teams or whatever units, whatever we call them in our organizations, so that if it's a calendar year, financial calendar, we don't get a surprise in June or we don't get a surprise in April where I need this tool, but it's not in the budget. How do we carry them along so that everybody is happy all the time and they don't see you as a roadblock, but rather as a supporting champion?
Yeah. So look, I've operated 3 tranches of risk of capital. So I've operated what is considered safe capital on the buy side of technology in publicly traded companies. You mentioned some of the banks that I worked in prior. And then I operated a private equity roll-up in healthcare, which is on the sell side of technology, where we were selling technology data and services to pharmaceutical companies to help them transform. And that's a little bit of a riskier capital, right? Private equity, CapEx investments, a little bit riskier. And then I operated 2 venture-backed startups, which is even higher risk capital. I took a lot of things from the large enterprise and implemented it in venture, in startups. And I also think there's an opportunity to take things from startup and bring it into the enterprise.
Yes.
And one of those things is around risk and capital. So if you're doing a project in the enterprise, you size the project, right? It's X amount of dollars. And then you go out and you get commitment to that budget. And the budget is sort of committed in a bucket, in a single bucket, where all of it is committed. And sort of that commitment means that you're good for the entire existence of the project, right? In startups, that's completely different. It may take X amount of dollars to build a business, but in the stages of risk of capital, you only get this amount of seed capital in the beginning. And until you've shown that you've taken a little bit of risk out of the business, do you get the Series A capital? And then you show that you've taken more risk out of the business, do you get to Series B, C, D, and onwards? Mm-hmm. And so I think that same practice or aspects of that practice should be brought into the enterprise, where if you're going off to do a large enterprise transformation, by all means, have an estimate around what the entire budget was cost. But as far as the release of that budget and the accountability of that budget, you want to be able to say, look, we're releasing 20% of that budget to take the tech execution risk out, okay? And if we can measure that we've taken the tech execution risk out, then we're going to release another 30% of that budget to go take the product market fit execution risk out of it. And if we get to the end of the product market fit phase and we just don't have product market fit, then the other 50% is going to get clawed back. And so that drives a level of accountability for taking risk out of the system and orienting around a long-term output, and also creating the type of motivation in the organization to constantly be realigning yourself to success against these tranches of risk of capital so that you're executing against a plan. I think that discipline and that frugality and that awareness and that hunger of understanding that the entire budget is not available for you, but you have to earn it to be able to keep it, is something that has to be introduced into the corporate budget cycle. And I think some of the anxiety that's in the macroeconomics and some of the new sort of ability to do, DevOps and product ops and RevOps, et cetera, is going to drive that behavior. So that's number one. I think budgets ought to not be thought of as this kind of like single SWAT of risk and commitment, but instead into these tranches of risk and commitment. And that has cultural implications and everything else. As far as selling, so that was much about executing on the inside of technology. As far as selling into an organization, so outside in to sell products, technology, and services, as it relates to selling from the business to technology and selling from the technology to business, I mean, I would argue, why do one when you should be doing both, right? Because there are things that both sides of the table are going to want to clarify. They're going to want to validate. They're going to want to make sure that aligns to what they're trying to do. But at the tip of that is something very different, which is selling to a business case as opposed to selling to a persona, right? I think that it is very difficult to argue against a solid business case, especially in an organization that wants to grow and is leveraging that cash flow to be able to grow. So I think for service providers that are trying to help clients grow and trying to drive that real disproportionate impact, is instead of starting from a business offering forward, start from a business case back. And that's going to force you to think from the client's mathematical framework. That's going to force you to think from the client's financial framework. That's going to force you to think from a client's priority framework. And if you're selling to a business case, it doesn't matter whether you're selling to the CIO, CTO, CFO, CEO, or president of a business unit, because a business case is a common language across these organizations, and that's what drives alignment and action.
Beautiful. So you should actually be selling to the business case, not to the persona, and that should always drive alignment. I love that. I love that. So in this process, would you still be thinking of the core fundamentals in terms of the basic ops, like internet costs, cloud costs, server costs, ops costs, DR costs, and all that? How do you align all this with the innovation part, which you have spoken largely about, but those basic operational stuff, how do you align them? And of course, with the new stuff that's going to come in, is there going to be a portion that is going to be for just CapEx, new projects, or is there going to be a portion that is going to be for innovation and R&D, or how exactly is the best way to handle it?
Yeah, so I think this comes down to whether the technological activities that you're engaging in are core to your business or they're enablers to your business. So for example, if your business is technology and you are building technology products and services and offerings in the marketplace, then you want to think about your technical debt. And how do you get enterprise architecture right? How do you get infrastructure right? How do you get vendor relationships right? MSAs and SLAs. How do you really size and manage the supply chain of technological assets and services and capabilities that you acquire? But if technology is an enabler for you, and you are trying to use technology to improve your conversion or your marketing or your brand or your service or your supply chain, a lot of times I've seen organizations that don't have technology at the core, but instead as an enabler, go off and overspend on infrastructure and overcommit in enterprise way before the question of whether this application of technology is going to drive business value or not. And so those two types of disciplines are on different sides of the same spectrum, which is, if you're a core technology company, the last thing you should do is acquire technical debt. You want to get the core fundamentals right because you're building a product on top of that, and you need that product to scale. And you don't want, when you see adoption in market, you don't want to be going back and fixing things because you're good at technology. There's going to be a technology outcome in the end. But if you're a retailer and you're trying to use technology to advance some KPI of the business, and you don't know for sure as yet if it's going to work, you don't know for sure as yet how it's going to adapt, it would not be smart to go off and spend, tens of millions of dollars in cloud infrastructure just in case it works. So from a budgeting standpoint, I think first and foremost is you got to figure out whether technology is core to your offering or technology is an enabler to your offering. And for the majority of the marketplace, technology is an enabler to the marketplace. Where you can get caught in using technology as an enabler and not over-investing in infrastructure until you know that outcome happens is a lot of times people forget that the groundwork was not done. And so you go out and you test this project and it works. And then the assumption is, okay, let's go, 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 go. And we forgot that we actually didn't do the core things in the beginning that we were only testing. And that's when you get yourself in trouble. So I think budgets are a lot more about words and a lot less about numbers than they used to be in the past. And I think that's the core sort of discipline that has to be adapted here. And it's not something that's in the obvious category. It's not something that's in the easy category, but it's something that's in the very important category.
Awesome. I love that. So as a digital leader, how does this now inform what you would choose to focus on in the new year? So we know it's a large organization. You can only do so much. I remember there was a joke with my former CIO that we used to have, that our projects or our ideas used to have a kind of 1-year cycle. And what was the 1-year cycle? We see it, we love it, we agree to do it, but before we can finally go live on the project, it typically takes us 1 year. For some funny reason, never planned. It was just in retrospect. Oh, we have a problem. Go do the research. Go find out the work. Fine. We need to do a load balancer. Awesome. Load balancer, let's go, let's start. Well, we just kind of found out that in between our failing fast, in between our deployment, in between our rinse, repeat, recycle, before we finally arrived at that destination, it used to be just 1 year, which is quite good and not bad at the same time. But as an organization where you have clamoring priorities and a lot of stuff, so the guys come to tell you that we need to go to the cloud now, we need to use Office 365, or we need to use Google Apps, and then the other guys come say AI is in town, we need to do AI, and then somebody comes screaming to say, no, we need to have a core data strategy, we need a data governance strategy, and all of them singing right over your head. As tech leader, even for now, let's not talk about the business people, let's say in the tech organization, which you have full control over technically. How do you identify what priorities to pick in the digital transformation journey for a particular year? Do you choose to do all at some percentage, while some will be in advanced stage, some will be at beginning phase, or do you choose to kill some for, permit my use of kill, permit me to use that word, but do you choose to step some down while you focus on the other? Because they've told us that once you focus on something for long, your light can begin to shatter glass and all this kind of stuff. So what do you think is the recommended approach?
Yeah. Well, I think prioritization is always going to be important. And that's sort of was always important. And I think that's always going to be important for all aspects of life. The question that I would like to address is who drives prioritization. And this is what I think is the crux of the evolution of the technology executive. In the first sort of growth horizon of the technology executive, the tech executive, at least from my experience, was someone who kind of hoarded priority, as in, I'm going to set the priority, I want to set the priority, I'm going to drive to set the priority. In the second horizon is someone who was sort of asked to set the priority, but then held accountable if the priorities were not set appropriately, right? As the technology function evolves and it goes into what I would consider to be this third horizon of maturity, one of the things that a technology leader has to be very cognizant of is how dynamic is their influence sphere within the organization. And here's what I mean by that. If you think about a chief marketing officer, the chief marketing officer may really, interact with 3 other C-suites in the organization, right? Maybe product, maybe sales, maybe finance. If you think about the chief compliance officer, same thing. But the chief technology officer or the chief information officer, or chief AI officer, or digital officer interacts with almost every single C-suite within the organization. And so the dynamicism of the engagement and the spherical nature of that engagement, by definition, calls for a type of governance where priority is driven in a shared context as opposed to an individual context. And I think that the more you can have priority driven by that governance framework that's horizontal and 360, the less strain there is in the organization, the less anxiety there is in the execution of the technology executive, and then the less impact of surprises when things go the other way, and as they inevitably will do because of the nature of the work. When priority is made sort of in a draconian way, it increases the anxiety, it increases the tension, and it increases the element of surprise. So I think that's sort of this natural evolution of the maturity of the C-suite sort of technologist. And the unique nature there is just the dynamics of the relationship architecture that you have across the C-suite. You've got to be able to govern those priorities in a very, very shared manner.
So do you recommend a kind of product management approach, or do you recommend a kind of collegiate approach where everybody comes to pitching to say, this is my priority for the year, and this is why it should be approved. And I hope I have been able to convince you with these few words of mine. And then a panel sits to approve, or which of them do you think is good? Because it needs also to be transparent.
Yeah. So look, I grew up in the financial services industry, and a lot of it was done the way you described, which is everyone comes and pitches their business case or their project proposal, and then it's sort of a win-loss situation, right? Somebody wins and somebody loses, and more importantly, that decision is made by sort of a governing body that kind of owns the strategy of the organization or the business unit, et cetera. And I think a lot of times that comes down to sort of personal traits, charisma, influence, right? Presentation skills, right? I've seen many really, really strong business cases in Excel don't get funded because of the messenger, right? And then I've seen really, really weak business cases in Excel get funded because of the messenger's use of PowerPoint. Right? And so I think the evaluation criteria is really sort of imbalanced. And what I found, and we did this at Lehman Brothers, which became Barclays eventually, was a standardization of the proposals. They had to fit within a certain standardized template, within the same framework, within the same measurement framework, so that they can be measured equally. And you had very little variation outside of your charisma and your dynamicism to actually influence the process in these sort of non-mathematical ways, right? I do think I would go back to one of my earlier points, though, which is this natural tendency and tact to plan for the year and check in the quarters is something that is hurting the large technology programs and organizations, because technology changes so fast and the density of the concurrency is increasing to be so high that you have to reevaluate constantly. And so even that approval process, where some things get approved because of the way they're pitched or because of product priorities, have to have an expectation of reapproval or recommitment along the way. So I think it's twofold. One is you've got to be able to figure out, how do you drive those priorities? Do you have a consistent criteria? Do you have a criteria that aligns to outcomes? And two is just to get back to what I'm sort of preaching here at the core of what I'm saying is this notion that can come from startups, which is these tranches of risk and this kind of reevaluation against confidence intervals, has to make its way into the enterprise, which is sort of orthogonal to an enterprise, which sets up a forecast and an actual for 12 months, right? Reports on calendar or your 12-month period. And so there's this kind of built-in tact of a 12-month period. But technology moves so fast, you've got to get to that 90-day approval process. We have to become a little bit more, I don't want to use the word agile because it's so overloaded, but it has to be a little bit more self-organizing than draconianly led, where you move a little bit less away from what feels like an organization and a little bit more to what feels like an organism, right? That's constantly reorganizing itself within a set of guiding principles, obviously, right? It's not a Wild West.
Yeah, I think the alternative word for agile in this scenario is nimble.
Right. Absolutely.
So you're more nimble, you can disintegrate and you can consolidate as the case may be, and you are able to still get the results. And then one other thing that you've mentioned, I think, is that startup mentality. It always helps in enterprise. It always helps because the enterprise is more like a big elephant or rhino, but the startup is still like a gazelle, or even if it's a big startup, it can still be like a leopard or a cheetah, which can still have the weight and the clout, but still move at speed. So we need to have that good balance: the speed of a cheetah, but the stability of an elephant or a rhino. Awesome stuff. Great. Now, awesome conversation so far. And now I think we're going to talk about something that you seem to love, which is risk. And risk from three perspectives primarily. That will be risk in terms of cybersecurity, which is gatekeeping and everything it comes with, risk, privacy, and all those kind of stuff. Then risk in terms of business continuity and scenario planning and disaster recovery, as the case may be. And then, of course, compliance with regulatory organizations. We've seen where Fortune 50 CIOs, in quotes, the gatekeepers, are consistently brought before Congress to, I mean, for me, it feels very, the word would be to say, it feels very disciplinary, like you're facing the disciplinary committee back in school, where, okay, so we were caught playing outside school hours, okay, go to the principal. And that is not where you want to be really as an organization. So how do we manage this as a tech enterprise? So in terms of cybersecurity, in terms of regulatory compliance across continents, as the case may be, where we begin to see in terms of business continuity and disaster recovery, and of course with data privacy, which is now becoming a thing.
Yeah. So cybersecurity is interesting in that a large percentage of cyber risk comes from people that are inside the organization. Well-intended people that are inside of an organization, right? I had an instance once where I was in debate with another C-suite colleague, a good, healthy debate about security and mobile phones and personal devices and VPNs on laptops and this type of stuff. And the argument was that we needed all this technology, all this VPN technology, all these mechanisms of 2FA and sandboxing of personal mobile phones because we needed to be secure. And I agreed with that, absolutely. And I said, I get this, but I'd like you to give me the quarter to run a query on the password table, okay? And it's a simple query. Select any row where the password is password 1, password 123, or password 12, and just summarize the amount of rows for me. That's it. Okay? I just want to know what percentage of our enterprise LDAP account has a password that's password 1, password 12, or password 123. And the person organized that. And we had a small wager. I wagered that it was going to be over 30%. And they wagered that it was going to be under 30%. And I won the wager. Okay. LDAP. And so I tell that story.
Sorry, this was LDAP.
This was LDAP. Wow. Right.
LDAP.
I tell that story only to, and I was out, and this was in financial services, by the way. I tell that story only to underscore this statement that cybersecurity is a lot more about people that are internal in an organization and awareness and behavior, and a lot less about external threat. Now, I'm not saying that there's not external threat. There's certainly a place for putting in proper processes, your ISO certification, your encryption, decryption mechanisms, your inside and outside of DMZ management, your backup, your recovery, all those types of things. But a lot of it is just discipline internally. Simple things like passwords, simple things like where you leave your laptop, if you're in a coffee shop, simple things like what Wi-Fi you connect to and how you treat that Wi-Fi based on the encryption, description, or safety risk exposure of it, right? Simple things about as to what you click on and what you don't click on, whether it's phishing or not. Now, that's not going to prevent you. You do need sort of that core meat and potatoes aspect of cybersecurity, but a lot of it is people-based. And I think that's the next wave of maturity and evolution of the role of the CISO, where the CISO is sort of migrating and maturing from that back office propeller head into that front office evangelist, if I may, of the responsibility of security that comes from personal behavior. So I think that's how I look at cybersecurity risk. Privacy is something that's dear to my heart. In my first startup, I introduced the argument that the United Nations should add a 31st human right to the 30 that we have right now, which would classify human data as human property. So just like we have our intellectual property, we could have inherent property rights around our data, which would make for a fair trade data marketplace, which would lean on consent, granular consent, in order to have the intentionality to use people's data for commercial purposes. So privacy is pretty close to my heart. As a privacy advocate, I will say that it is important to recognize that privacy is a moving target. Privacy is not something that's been fixed for 100 years. There has been innovation in privacy. There has been change in privacy, right? Privacy in the US actually kind of got its first wave of popularity from postcards. During the wars, people would send postcards back home to their spouses with very personalized messages in the postcards. And the postal office would have an opportunity to read all of that before it's delivered to the home, whether it's I love you or something else. And so the early versions of privacy, or at least it's one of its big awareness in the US, was envelopes around postcards, because you can't look at people's mail, right? And so privacy has been evolving, and there has been an evolution of it. Now, in some cases, it evolves from a cultural perspective. From some cases, it evolves from a danger perspective. With technology, it's easier to violate it. It's easier to do it at mass scale. It's easier to micro-manipulate at mass scale, et cetera. I believe that the organization's responsibility around privacy is one that is more ethical than it is mathematical or technical. It's a decision that has to be made. It has to become a core value that you value, right? Not necessarily a practice. It has to be as core to your value systems as integrity, as trust. And I think the way to do that is really to start to think about it from your own perspective, which is me as an executive, me as a father, me as a husband. How do I feel about my own privacy? How does it impact me myself? And then bring that conversation to the table, because privacy is a very human issue. It's a very personal issue. And I think that's the way to get the C-suite and the board to really tie into it as a core value. By all means, it has technical implications, but it starts more from a core value perspective as opposed. And this will lead very quickly into the last category of risk that you outlined, which is around the shifting and constantly shifting regulatory framework, and how you might be caught in one of those third rails of regulatory sort of out of compliance, so to speak. In my experience, most of the people that are out of compliance from regulation is oversight. It's something that was missed. It's something that you just didn't catch in time. It's something where it fell through the cracks of your processes. However, there is a portion of privacy of compliance violations that are intentional, in the sense that I deliberately decided to not engage in the compliance activities that are needed there. And that's where you get into trouble. That category of intentionality is broken up into two parts. Part number one is I decided that I'm not going to comply with this particular regulation because you know what? It's just too much overhead for me. And the cost of getting a fine is something that I'm willing to take on as a business. And it doesn't hurt anybody if I do that, right? That's one category of not doing it right. But that is not as egregious as some of the organizations who know they're not doing it. They choose to not do it, and they choose to ignore the impact of it not being done. And that's where you see some of the large social media companies and those executives being called to the table, because it's not category one where it was an oversight. It's not category two where you decided to not do it. I get it. That's why we have an audit system. That's why we have fines, right? That's why we have those things. You're in category three where you opted not to do it. You knew that it had a negative impact above and beyond the spirit of the law, but you decided to do it anyway. And I think that's where people are getting in trouble.
Okay, awesome stuff. And do you have any thoughts about disaster recovery and things like that?
You know, I don't, because I haven't been in infrastructure for a long time.
Okay.
It's been a couple of years since I've had a responsibility for infrastructure. But I will say this, like, if you're still thinking about disaster recovery, you've got the wrong technology executive team, because that should have been something that was crossed over sometime around the millennium.
Agreed. But what of business continuity? That same category?
Well, that's new. Yeah, no, that's new. And this is something where risk comes from all angles, right? Business continuity could be impacted because of a damaging action that your brand took in the marketplace, right? Business continuity can come from over leveraging yourself from a balance sheet perspective. Business continuity risk can come from cyber attack. Business continuity risk could come from bad HR principles, right? That led to revolts and things like that. So I think the one thing I will say about business continuity is there's an awareness now that it's beyond operation. Like, we just realized that supply chains were a part of business continuity as we thought about the sort of global impact of COVID, right? So the one thing I would say about business continuity is that the awareness has broadened beyond just technological and operational aspects of it, but into brand, into culture, into employee behavior, et cetera.
Awesome. Beautiful. So we have about 4 more items that we're going to touch about, and then we can call it a day, because it's really critical. I really wish I could run over them, but let's just talk about them quickly. So in terms of talent, in the tech market, there is the wave where there is a hiring frenzy in the market. And what organizations would typically do is that they don't want to lose the best talent. So whether they need the talent or not, they go to hire, and then they weed them at some point later. Yeah, that cycle. Now, but maybe that should not be primary, but what should you be thinking about in terms of talent for the year? If you're planning for the year, what would be top of mind in terms of talent for your organization? Especially now that we're having emerging technologies where you would probably need some people that would do stuff. And for example, if you didn't have an AI strategy, now one way or the other, you need to have an AI strategy. Which is a little bit of an enhancement than your data strategy. If you didn't have a policy strategy or a risk strategy, now if you have to talk about AI, you need to talk about risk. And it cannot just be your cybersecurity guys who are going to talk about data risk. You need the data professional. And of course, you are not going to outsource all this to KPMG or EY or Accenture, as the case may be. So and I could go on and on and on and on and on, but those are just quick examples. So as a CIO, what would your thoughts be in terms of talent? Knowing that you might have a fixed budget, or your budget might come to you in tranches, how do you think it would work?
So I think the best practice of the CIO has evolved from I'm responsible for talent and I try to hire everybody internally to I'm responsible for efficient and effective deployment of a budget. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I have to hire everyone internally. I can absolutely use the technology service providers or the platforms of the system integrators, et cetera. There's a new reality around the mentality of the mindset. By all means, there's still need and good proper need to keep talent in-house, especially talent that's differentiated and core to your business, especially talent that's differentiated and core to aspects of your business that are absolutely mission critical, right? And in that frame, you are organizing that deployment of capital and budget with a different orientation, right? You can't swap talent in and out as much as you'd like, right? You don't have the flexibility of short-term sort of budgeting. You're always thinking about the long-term of the budgeting because you don't want to have a high attrition of that talent because you're losing so much institutional knowledge and capital through that process. And so in that category, if I were to think about one word that matters in that category of your sort of in-house employees, it's unlearning. I think we spent a lot of time learning, and we do upskill quite a bit. I mean, the great organizations upskill quite a bit, but unlearning doesn't happen enough. And unlearning is something that can hurt you because the things that you've learned become biases eventually. And biases tend to not refresh themselves and expire. And the longer you hold a bias, the more dangerous it is to the outcome of what you're contributing. So I think one of the things that a technology executive has to do in partnership with HR through an HR transformation is to really engage in not just learning, but unlearning, to question assumptions, to question biases. And a way to kind of know if you're not unlearning enough as an organization is if there's too many arguments that either start with or end with, that's the way we've always done it. That's the sort of the signal that you're not unlearning enough and you're carrying biases forward too long and they're starting to corrode against your decision-making framework in the organization. With talent that's on the outside, which is you're bringing in a service provider, whether it's Deloitte, Accenture, KPMG, EY, or even mid-sized service providers, it's important to think about the bets that your partners are making. The people who win are the people who make bets earlier than others. There's no shortage of companies that are going to become cloud experts the minute cloud got in place, or are going to become mobile experts as soon as mobile became the topic. Or most recently, it's going to become AI experts because AI just became topical. One of the things I like to look for is the partners that are making bets 5 years before that thing becomes a reality. And that has to do with their appetite for investment, their appetite for risk, their ability to get out of that annual cycle and say, we're going to make a commitment to build a data and AI practice 5 years before ChatGPT, so that when it arrives, I actually have substance in my skill set and in my offerings. So that's how I think about the external partners. I look for people that have the P&L and the budgeting discipline and the investment courage to invest in the trends that may come. So when they arrive, it's not sort of everybody just changes their LinkedIn profile to become AI experts. There's actually substance and evidence-backed go-to-market around it.
Beautiful. I love that. So which also means that one's vendor management strategy should not just be about those who push hardware and sell licenses. You also need to have innovation experts in your vendor pool, or a budget for innovation talent in your vendor pool, so that it's, as like you said, one needs to have a growth mindset, which allows you to minimize the unnecessary unconscious bias. Also, one needs to ensure that it's not everything that you're going to do, especially if it's not core to your business, but you also need to have early adopters at your beck and call that you can easily work with, and they are also ready to work with you on the long term. Awesome. I think that's good.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think the last thing that we would really focus on, because you've said a lot of stuff in that one, but before we go to the last one, it would be about IT infrastructure and ops. Yes, I know, like you said, disaster recovery should be gone, but what should you be thinking about in terms of, yeah, we've got cloud, we've got DevOps, we've got automation, we've got geo redundancy and everything, but we still have to do customer care. We still need to approve deployments one way or the other. We still need to ensure that people are served. We still need to take calls. We need to do all those operational stuff. So what are your thoughts around it?
So I think first I would say that DevOps, has to move to DevSecOps. Security has got to be embedded in the build pipeline from a purely technical standpoint. But more broadly to your question, the notion of ops, so to speak, right, whether it's DevOps or something else, has to be built into everything else. My general sort of observation of the trend line is that operational management and operational stability and operational maturity is something that has to do with what talent do you put towards ops. A lot of times you'll notice that system engineers become the folks that lead ops, or technologists are the folks that lead ops. And while that works in some cases, operation by itself and the capability and the capacity and the natural instincts and the characteristics and the talent to manage something to 5 nines of SLA, and to be able to have the dedication, the fortitude, the type of focus, the type of leadership skills to manage an operations department is a talent pool by itself. It's a talent skill by itself. It's no different than how you hire salespeople to be salespeople and you don't let technology people grow up to be salespeople. So I think that's the real opportunity there. I think a lot of times, because operations has so much to do with technology and technology automation, we tend to take technologists and turn them into operations masters. And I think that breaks down sometimes, because a technologist by definition is a little bit more creative, right? It's a little bit more risk-taking. It's a little bit more inventive. And when you're thinking about ops and 5 nines of an SLA, unfortunately, creativity is not the top skill that you need. It's a little bit lower in the pecking order, so to speak. So I think that's the broad kind of high level of it. And then I think, there's sort of this love-hate relationship with automation, right? Where people look at automation as your workforce reduction, as opposed to work style
enhancement,
optimization, right? And so I think automation ought to be embraced significantly. And then exception management is what you use the human in the loop for better exception management, for better complexity management, et cetera. I don't think it's a labor reduction. It's a labor optimization, which is no different from the debate we're having with AI right now, which is it going to take jobs, or is it going to automate jobs and then orient humans in the last mile to actually do a better job with the highly critical or highly complex aspects of the role?
Beautiful. I love this. And the reason why I love it is that part of the growth mindset, and the default bias, the growth mindset which we need to adopt, default bias which we need to reduce, is that automation or new tech doesn't take jobs. It is people using automation or people using new tech that take the jobs. So like my previous guests, Donna, said, AI, with all the buzz, pomp, and glory, is not going to come up and take over the CEO suit tomorrow. It's not going to happen. It's a journey, and things need to be done for that to happen. But at the same time, the company that doesn't plan to take in AI or plan to adopt AI might cease to exist. And the same thing, the guy who is going to take your job, even if they say AI is now writing scripts, AI is now deploying stuff, the AI default script is never going to work. It has to be a script that has been deployed or tuned for your environment. And that still has to be done by a human. So no matter how intelligent the script is, it is a human using AI scripts that is taking the job of the manual script writer or script engineer, as the case may be. So it is someone who is using automation or someone who is using AI that is going to take your job, not necessarily AI itself. AI is not as smart as us as we are in all its glory. Which brings me to the final one about new technology. So you've got the opportunity to unleash whatever AI talk you wanted to unleash all day. Now this is the time you can talk about all the AIs and all the new stuff and all the quantum computings and all the new stuff. But before I do that, I love the content again. I think something you mentioned lastly took us back to the issue of adoption. Adoption is really critical in the organization. A lot of people overlook it. Once we just buy the tool, once we just deploy the platform, they think it's going to work. But we've come to see that when there's no core adoption strategy, whatever you have is still a joke. And it's until we have that adoption properly deployed, properly implemented, that then it becomes a way of life. Even with the automation, even with the whatever things that we do, there needs to be that solid adoption strategy in place. Just said to highlight that. So time to talk about new technologies. The year of AI was 2023, ChatGPT, Sam Altman being fired and then being more powerful than his board and all those exciting things that happened. So what are your thoughts? But before we just go off on the tangent of AI, because AI is not the only new technology, how do you think, first of all, a tech executive should think in terms of new technology for the year? You've mentioned the MSPs and the vendor relationship for that, but what again should be at the back of a CXO's mind while he's planning for the year? And then which one should he be thinking about? And then let's have an AI conversation and then we call it a day.
Yeah. Well, I think we've talked about AI enough. The capacity to adopt change doesn't really change. Humans have been absorbing change for a very long time. Whether it's electricity or air travel or the internet or music, right? Or, getting up onto 2 feet, if we can suspend religion temporarily. Our capacity to absorb change is going to be a constant. And there's no such thing to me as new technology. To me, technology is just what's new. And there's a very subtle nuance in that statement. There's no such thing as new technology for me. For me, technology is just what's new. Right? And so my sort of operating posture and how I would advise and guide others who I collaborate with is to focus on your discipline of absorbing change and your processes for absorbing change and your behaviors and your structures for absorbing change, much more than absorbing the next change that's here. And here's what I mean by that. If you are a CIO today and you are reacting to AI and you're having to ask for new budget for AI, I would argue that you didn't do the job as well as you could do the job. Because after seeing, mainframe to desktop, after seeing, desktop to server-based computing, after seeing the internet, after seeing mobile, after seeing social, after seeing cloud, right? After seeing what I would consider to be big data modernization, you have to assume that every 2 to 3 years, there's going to be something that you're going to have to absorb. And so your conditioning of the board, your allocation of a certain part of your budget for high-risk activities, your talent pool of people who you've put off in an innovation department and rotate them in and out for upskilling and unlearning, All of those things are functions and muscle within an organizational structure that have to be there so that you're prepared to absorb change. The capacity to absorb change takes about 3 to 5 years. If you didn't have the muscle memory to absorb change today, this is where you got to go out to the service providers to get you there in 9 to 18 months, because you don't have 3 to 5 years. Then you are by definition behind already. Whereas the companies that absorb change efficiently are the ones who've already built the muscle, and they don't consider new technology. They just assume that there's always going to be something that's new, and they call it technology.
Awesome. I love that. So if you are still looking for AI budget, we probably need to get you a new job. I love that. I love that. Thank you so much, Richie. This has been an exciting conversation, and I think you have also had fun. How do you feel?
Oh, I love this. I hope that the things that I say are actually impactful to the audience and it could be acted on. I mean, I also encourage discourse. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we share, we learn from others, right? We learn through discussion, we learn through mentorship, we learn through experience and influence. So this is pretty much a two-way street. As much as I'm sharing what I believe and what I know, I learn a lot from others. So I'm welcoming a two-way discussion here.
Beautiful. Thank you. So before we leave, we typically would have a trivia for you to deal with. And one of the last speakers said that her own trivia is that you should keep experimenting, because you really don't just get the working formula right away. So what we do as the trivia is, when you speak about the trivia the person gave, you also drop a trivia for the next speaker. So what are your thoughts about continuous experimentation?
Yeah, it's hard to debate against continuous experimentation because it's the raw material of discovery, right? But the raw material of discovery is curiosity. I think curiosity is something that is semi-innate. And I describe curiosity by the breadth of things that you experiment with, not just the depth and volume of things that you experiment with. So if you think about a technologist that experiments in technology a lot, by all means, you're an experimenter. But I feel that the folks who have a broader sphere of curiosity will experiment with, mechanics, automotive mechanics, or dancing, or rock climbing, or music, right? Or cooking. And I think that general broader sense of curiosity is something that kind of advances the quality and the outcome of one's experimentation, because you're kind of going outside of your comfort zone, which is a part of it. And my sort of leave ahead for others is courage. I think that change has been productized. There's a lot of change agents within organizations, but I think courage is the next frontier of human leadership. And I think we're going to start to have to look for and cultivate courage agents within organizations. And that's because the change is coming so fast and it's so concurrent. You have to make decisions in the absence of enough evidence to make those decisions. And that requires courage.
Beautiful. So courageous people will always go for the new change. Courageous people will always have the growth mindset. Courageous people will not be afraid to experiment something new. Courageous people will not say this is how it has always been done, so we must stick to it or else. Beautiful. That's a lot of stuff you've kept for the new founder. Thank you so much, Richie. Today we on our session on CIO and CXO planning for tech for the new year on our Hello 2024 series on the GLIT podcast. We had Richie Etwaru, who is the CEO of Medio, an AI company in the UK, in the US, and he's had a lot of insights that he's giving us, and we know that you have benefited a lot. So till we meet again, check us out on our Spotify channels, check us out on our YouTube channel, check us out wherever you listen to your podcast. And of course, click that subscribe button, because we are going to give you so much in the next few months to come. It is again Tosin from the GLIT podcast, Global Leadership and Innovation and Technology podcast. Thank you for listening and have a wonderful 2024 ahead. Thank you.